Last time we looked into the setup of our Colab environment. We installed MuseScore 3, we installed Fluent Synth, and we also took a look at the libraries that we're going to use. To use the libraries, if they're not installed by default in Google Colab, we would need to install them. But in our case, all the libraries here, they are already pre-installed in Google Colab, so we just need to import them. If you're not familiar on how to import Python packages, libraries, modules, I recommend that you take a look at the Python for Beginners playlist, and we have here a part where we talk about Python modules, packages, and import, different ways how we can use this import, and it's part of this series Python for Beginners, Basics of Digital Audio Processing and Machine Learning for audio. So I will not go into the detail now. We already see here that we can import Librosa. There's one way how to import, and from Music 21 import this start, like import everything, for example, and import IPyWidgets as widgets. So if you're not familiar on how to import, take a look here at these explanations and examples, and then we can continue. After we import, I decided to use a class that I'm calling the EarTraining Class to have all the parameters and some methods I am going to use for the EarTrain application. What we will do here is to include in this class all the attributes, all the parameters that we're going to use. We can set some default values here at the init method of this class. Then we can also set different attributes and parameters, and we have this method called myChord, and this chord will return or an interval or a chord depending on the values that we use to create an object using this class, how we use this class. So if you're not familiar with Python class, I recommend that you go back to the playlist Python for Beginners, and here you also find explanations about Python classes. I will also leave a link in the description because I will not go into the details of Python classes now. I will focus on what we are doing and not explaining the class keyword, what is the init method, which can be seen, for example, as a constructor in C++, what are the self, other methods. We will focus on other things in this tutorial, but I prepared already here Python classes. Here I'm going to talk with example about what's a class, the self, the class constructor, what's a class string, what are private and protected attributes and methods, so you can take a look at this tutorial here. In this class here, I'm defining, for example, the lowest note, which would be an A2, and the highest note, which would be a C6. In this case, is the highest note to start an interval or a chord. So if I decide that the highest is C6, I could also have a perfect third or up to a perfect fifth or whatever from this highest note here. So this is the range for the root to be located. We have here a root. If we decide to create a random root, we pass this word random. If not, we can define, for example, I want the root to be a C3. For example, we can pass the quality that As I explained, I'm calling quality if it's a major chord, a minor chord, or a name of some interval. Then the duration of the note, the style, meaning if it's melodic or harmonic, melodic notes playing one after each other and harmonic notes playing together, and direction being ascending or descending. So these are certain parameters that we can use when we create an object using this class. Let's have an example. So I'll put test is ear training, and I want just to use the default values. Let's see what we get if we test my chord. It returned me a chord with the root on the G sharp 4, then the other note will be a C5, and the other note will be a E flat 5. I can see then it generated another chord, and I'm displaying here. And we have access to attributes of the chord. So let's see, the root is an E flat. I can run again. Now the root is a B flat because I'm using the default value of random, and it will randomly select a root inside these intervals here. I could, for example, set the root to be a C3, and now I have the root as a C. It is a note, so I can get a full name. It's a C in octave 3, and it's a quarter note. So now let's change everything, and I want to use this class to create an object that will be, will return me an interval. Let's see if I want a perfect fifth, and I want harmonically, so it's different from the default. And I want to be an A. Let's use an A3, for example. So my root will be A3. My style will be harmonic, and my quality in this case, because I'm calling quality this, I want a perfect fifth. Now if I test root, it should be an A3, and I could also display. So I'm using here intervals and chords, but so I'm calling an interval. So indeed it is an A, it is harmonic, and it is a perfect fifth, because we have the A3, and then the perfect fifth will be an E. And we created this object using this class. We passed some values, and for example these values can be passed by the values of these GUI elements. I could also include here one slider, and we could define, for example, the range of the lowest and the highest root. We could do this. We could change duration of notes, but most of the functionality we have here in this GUI, and this is the basic structure of this class. So it has some attributes that we can use. So inside, when we create an object, we will have access to the strings. We convert these strings into intervals. From these intervals, we can use to build our intervals like dyads. we can have triads and we can have tetrads. And I'm doing very basic stuff, so I'm constructing one by one. So we know in music theory that the major chord uses the root, the major third, and the perfect fifth. So I create a major list with these intervals, and then I have a list of triads, which is a dictionary. So if I call it major, it will look for this major list of intervals, and then music 21 we can transform these intervals into a chord. For example, we can see here in this my chord method, for example, that we have a list of notes. This list of notes is generated by transposing the root according to intervals that are defined by these attributes here. And then I can take this list of notes and create a chord, for example, or I just append them, creating a string, and append them if I want it to be melodically, and then depending on the style it will also melodically can be seen, let's call it like a chord arpeggio, that notes of the chord are playing, I played one after another instead of being played together. And if it's an arpeggio or if it's melodically, I create a string and then I append notes to the string. If it's harmonic, notes played at the same time, it's just a chord, and then we will have all the notes played together. In our next tutorial, then I will discuss, for example, the interval function part of the music 21. So I already have a tutorial that talks about Python lists, about strings. So this is a list of strings, or about dictionaries. I don't think I have a tutorial about zip, so I will cover that. Here we create a list in a very interesting way. This is a function based on p, and p is in this interval string. So what it's doing is for p in this interval string, it will get the interval of p and it will put it in a list. But we will cover that later on, or you will find it in different tutorials. So we have here basically this interval. We will discuss this part of the music 21 library. Later on we have here random. We will get a random number between a certain range. We have Librosa note to MIDI, I mentioned before. So if we have a note, we will convert this note to its MIDI number, and then it will generate a number between this range, and this number we will use to create a note. And this is also part of the music 21 library, and we will discuss that. We have here some transposing functionality, duration, we have strings, chords, and this is what I will focus. So if I already have another tutorial covering some basic Python programming, I will point you to that, and here I will focus more on this new stuff that I didn't cover in other tutorials like music 21 and so on. So next time we will start going line by line here inside this class and see what we can learn from that.